Good morning guys and welcome back. This video is not going to be one of a takeoff or of a landing, but it's going to be a video of why my sim looks the way it looks. Now it's going to be a combination of quite a few factors. In terms of visuals, I do have add-ons like Active Sky and Cloud Art, um, ENVTX, I guess that's pronounced MVTX, and then there's M Shade. Um, I've got Free Mesh, which you can download as well. Gives your sim contours. It's not so flat as portrayed without it. Usually in a lot of areas the terrain is quite flat, but free mesh rather makes it look a bit more lifelike. I've got Orbx, I've got open land class, I've got vector, I've got oh, I've just lost my train of thought, but I've got quite a few of Orbx. I don't have any of the airports. I've got Europe land open land class for Europe. I've got it for South and North America, and in terms of the camera shaking, I've got Chaseplane for movements with head movements. I've got Tracker, and what most of you would normally hear is FS2 crew, which pretty much is a virtual first officer to handle some of the workload in the cockpit. So most of these aircrafts, all these jets, they're designed to be flown with two pilots, and it can be a bit overwhelming if you're doing the job of both, and it's more realistic in terms of immersion and stuff like that. Airports, this one is Amsterdam, or as we'll call it Schiphol, and this is by Flight Hamper. My aircrafts, mostly PMDG, 747, 777, and the 737 variants. They are all PMDG. I've got a few others like A2A simulations. I've got Majestic Q400. I have for V3, I have Aerosoft Airbuses 318 to 21, but they're not compatible in V4, which you're looking at. So for now I don't have any Airbuses. Get it down to the settings. Just gonna advise you that any settings that you see out there, use it as a start as to what you're actually looking for. A lot of people's sims don't share much in common, and you'll find that settings for one will not look the same for another. Some of these settings are mine, a lot of them are not. I've borrowed them from my cousin, who's Caribbean Simmer. I've borrowed it from Orbx recommendations, NTEX and MShade recommendations, and then I just did what works best for me. However, it is a bit of tweaking here and there every now and then, but one thing you need to always keep in mind is that there's always a trade-off. The better your sim looks, the worse it will perform, and in some cases, depending on the power of your PC, this performance can be negligible, or that performance hit can bring your computer to its knees. So you want to find the right balance where it's nice eye candy, but your sim does not become a slideshow. So back to FS2 crew. 747 has it, 738 has it, the 77 has it. If you have the MD 11, I think, or MD 8, I'm not sure, I don't have that aircraft, but it's Mad Dog, or McDonald as it's officially known. They have it for that as well. They have it for the Q400. And like I said, basically it's just helping you with your workload as a pilot. They will do certain checks, certain flows that you yourself won't have to do, and you just get to concentrate on being the captain rather than being captain and first officer as well. I guess what you're really interested in is the settings, so let's get into that. Um, for display, this is going to be based on your monitor. I have a 4K monitor, so I've pretty much running it at 3840 by 2160 by 32. I've got a 1080 Ti graphics card. My computer specs listed below is an i7 7700 at 4.2 gigahertz stock. Can be overclocked. At the moment, I do not have it overclocked. FXAA is something that you want to turn off if you're using regular anti-aliasing. It looks horrible with both of them running. For my computer and monitor, I've got it at 4 MSAA, texture resolution at ultra 4096 by 4096, and anisotropic by 16. VSync is on. Triple buffering I've kept off, just a personal preference, no reason really.
Check.
And maybe a good idea that I do mute FS2 crew. Target frame rate, this is personal preference. I've heard different arguments about where it should be. Some people say it should be half the refresh rate of your monitor. My monitor is a 60 hertz. Some say that you should lock it to the FPS that the hertz is on the monitor, which is 60 in my case. And then some say that you should leave it at unlimited. Whatever works for you, feel free to use. What I would say is that if you have a computer that's not the strongest, you might want to at maximum lock it at 60 FPS, because if you have a 60 hertz monitor, no matter how much frames that you get above 60 hertz, you are not going to be able to see it, and you're just working the computer harder than it need to work. um, it's debatable, but that's what I've understood, and it does make sense. Now, if you have a computer that is like what NASA and them have, then feel free. But if your computer isn't that powerful, then you might want to scale back on that to something where you have enough eye candy without making your computer or your sim into a slideshow. Map VC panels, I've got that ticked. Everything else I've got taken off. To whirl, this is the settings that I've actually borrowed from others, and you just need to do it in the to what actually your computer can handle, what you're happy to have. Level detail radius ultra, tessellation factor high, mesh resolution at 5, texture resolution at 7. I believe for mesh resolution, if you have like FS Stream airports, they recommend that they be at 5. If you put it at 1 meter, which is the highest, you're gonna find that you have all kind of weird things happening. For example, Houston International Airport. If I've realized that when I did have it really high, um, you ended up with speed bumps in the taxiway, and it's real because if you go over it, the aircraft becomes airborne. So you want to pay attention to what add-ons you have, what recommendations the developers have for their add-ons, and then tweak your settings accordingly. Scenery complexity, autogen distance, autogen vegetation density, and autogen building density. All of these will affect and how your computer performs. So for myself, very dense, very high, very dense, and very dense respectively. I've got high resolution terrain textures enabled, but I've disabled dynamic 3D autogen vegetation. I don't have the Orbx trees, I just have the 2D ones, and they look horrible when they're moving in the wind. Um, Water detail is on ultra. Enable bathymetry, that's basically having like corals and stuff in the water. It gives you a sense of depth. I don't like how it looks, so I have that turned off. Reflections, again, personal preference. I've only got clouds and terrain. Sorry, rather user vehicle and terrain. I used to have clouds, but I turn it off because I have shadows, and having shadows and reflections does affect your performance, but in my opinion, I don't like the look of both. So I've turned off reflections for clouds and I've kept on shadows. Lighting, this is going to be based on a few factors, and it's going to come down to what you have that is rendering your textures. I've got MText and MShade. I used to have Rex texture direct and soft clouds, I believe it was, um, and I also had PTA. This is going to vary if you're someone that has PTA, because depending on the preset for PTA, this will make a big difference in how your sim looks. So you're gonna want to pay attention to what your settings look like with your monitor, as well as taking into consideration who you have that is taking care of your textures, whether it be M shade, whether it be PTA, whether it be Rets, whether it be even the same tomato shade. Just on a side note, I do not have tomato shade. It looks great, but I'm not willing to put something on my computer that no one knows where it comes from. It's just a file that's being passed around through no official means, and I'm very skeptical about things like that. Like I said, it looks great, and if you do decide to use it, that's on you. I say follow the instructions properly. Don't take any shortcuts so you have the desired effect. But um, it's not something that I'm willing to use, so I give that a miss. And the settings again here would depend on what you're using again. Tomato shade, Rex, M shade, Ender, Envitex, you name it. You want to have HDR lighting on though, especially if you're someone that's going to be flying at night. If you're not flying at night, it doesn't make a difference. But even though that you will have landing lights illuminate ground, if you have HDR lighting off, you will not be able to see the runway when you're approaching it, because the lights won't illuminate that much. Dynamic reflections, personal preference. At airports like these, you're going to find that because of the amount of glass, if you have dynamic reflections on, it will affect the performance of the sim. The higher it is, the poorer the performance is. But that is all things being equal. If you have a really powerful computer, sometimes moving the sliders to the right will be negligible. Dynamic lighting, some airports do offer it, not all. This is hard on frames, depending on which airport you're going at. If it's in London, if it's Boston, you'll find that it's a bit higher on frames than if you're actually going to San Francisco with Flightbeam. So again, you this is something that even if you have it on, if you have an airport that is really sucking the life out of your sim with the dynamic lighting, you can always turn that off in their settings rather than your sim. But again, that's personal preference. Shadow quality, shadow distance. With shadow quality, I've got it on high for the main reason that if you have an overcast day in places like Newark, KEWR, that's Kilo Echo Whiskey Romeo, you'll find that the taxiways and runways are very hard to make out the markings where you should taxi, especially at night, or just late in the evening. So I've kept it down to high, and for shadow draw distance I've got that on ultra. Casting and receiving, I've got internal and external vehicles, and then only on receiving I've got clouds and terrain. Weather, I ran active sky and active sky cloud art, so I've got my draw distance for 60 miles. You can put it up to 90 miles. That's personal preference again. I don't think I can see in my sim further than 60 miles, so I've kept it at 60 miles. Cloud coverage density, I've got that at maximum. I've got a few changes in terms of clouds on active sky, which I'll go through briefly, not too much in detail, because there's only two things I've really changed. I've got detailed clouds, volumetric fog, detailed precipitation, and windshield effects on. Windshield effects is not going to make a difference for most add-on aircraft at the moment. Some do have it, such as the CRJ, I believe, the MDs. Um, I think they have true glass, so they can simulate the rain. Um, I don't have any aircrafts that do it at the moment, but I've kept it ticked. If you're someone that fly GA and you fly default aircraft, you will have rain falling on the aircraft once it is default um, aircraft, as well as default weather. If you have active sky controlling your weather and it's raining, it will not simulate the raindrops on the aircraft. But again, that's personal preference. And that's pretty much it. Last thing enables turbulence. That's more of how the aircraft behaves with the winds aloft. For active sky, the only things that I've really changed outside of showing text will be my cloud options. For cloud layers, I've brought it down to 3. I really can't see the difference between 4 and 5 in terms of visually seeing it. However, I do record most of my videos, so if I'm coming through a lot of clouds, you'll find that when you have it at 5, it does affect the performance of the aircraft negative, well, of the sim rather, negatively. So you might get sticking, and you might find that depending on the aircraft you're using, it does really funky like things that it shouldn't be doing, because the frames is just way too low for the aircraft. The next thing that I've changed would be the way that it actually behaves, I believe. Where is that? No, that's not cloud layers. That would be more like wind options and effects. There. Actually, I forgot I've put it back normal. But for this, if you're flying through cells, whether it be orange or whether it be really red, if you have it as high as I do, you'll find that the aircraft becomes very hard to control, as it should. Some people don't like it and think it's very unrealistic. So this you can actually bring down. I've kept it there because I'm trying to practice good pilotship or airmanship, meaning that if I see red, I'm supposed to go around it rather than go through it. And that pretty much covers everything. I hope this helps. And like I said, there's no one size fits all when it comes to settings for the actual sim. It's what's best for you personally in terms of taking eye candy or taking performance. In some cases you can't have them both, and even though I have a reasonably good and powerful computer, you find that all of my settings aren't full to the right. You really need to have a really good computer to do that, and most computers you can't. The engine for P3D doesn't really take into consideration all the hardware, and there's a bottleneck in most cases, so you can have the most powerful computer and P3D will not take the full advantage of it. That might change in future releases, but at the moment it is what it is. I think I covered Chaseplane with you guys. If I didn't, I just go over it. Basically, it allows me to do different camera views like this. I use it in I use it in not the experimental but in the full version. Experimental tends to be buggy and I don't want to be in the middle of a flight and it crashing just because of Chaseplane. But basically you've got all your different types of presets. I'm using track IR and I've changed the position I'm sitting, so now it looks a little bit different. If I put my chair back, this is how it should be, but I got a bit comfortable and just swung the chair around, and that's why you're looking at it from this angle. So track IR allows me to look at different angles. Chaseplane simulates the camera shake and gives me the different views. I've got my cockpit overview, which is like from the jump seat. I've got front right, follow, wing left, wing right, nose gear, and then I can have static views from different runways. So yeah, it's quite good. Out there, there's only two that I'm aware of there that allows you to simulate different types of view. I've lost my train of thought on the first one, but basically there's Chaseplane. The other one I didn't find as friendly to use, but to each their own. Chaseplane has a community where you can just type in the aircraft and then you can download views from users that have made their own. I've not been experimenting with views. I just download what I see are out there that might look good. So if you click on the eye there, it shows you which view it actually is, and if it's something that you want to have, then you just click this download arrow and that goes into your presets. I don't have too many presets. I should get some more, but I'm quite happy with those for the moment. And I think that brings it to the end. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to, as always, leave them below and I'll try to accommodate as best as I can. Once again, thanks for viewing, thanks for subscribing and giving me a reason to keep putting up videos. Hope this was helpful, and if there's something that I said that was incorrect or not exactly as it should be, feel free to enlighten me. We're all learning, so I welcome any input or feedback from you guys. At this point I'm going to sign off and wish you guys a great day and speak to you soon.